Be talking about a theory I came across, and I'm sure it existed before this, but I found it on movieplot.com, and I'll have a link below that so you can read the actual article. And it's the theory that in Back to the Future, Doc Brown killed Marty McFly. Not the Marty McFly we see and follow throughout the narrative of the film, but the Marty McFly that would exist in the alternate 1985 they created by going back in time to 1955. And as Back to the Future is a personal favorite of mine, it is my favorite. It is the trilogy. I'm gonna prove Doc's innocent. He might be kind of a terrorist technically, but he's not a murderer. Okay, so the theory states that in Back to the Future 1, that when Marty returns to 1985, and he has saved Doc's life by giving him a letter in 1955 telling him that he's going to be shot by Libyan terrorists. That would be a weird letter to read. That when they're at the mall, they see a replaying of the beginning of the film when Marty is traveling back in time in the DeLorean to 1955 again. So the theory states that when that Marty comes back to 1985 again, that Doc will have to kill that Marty to make room for the Marty that we've been following. And this actually isn't true. And I'm going to prove it based on the information that Back to the Future 2 gave us. So when you're writing a story, you get to make rules. Specifically, like in science fiction, whoever is creating the story gives us certain things that we know characters and technology can and cannot do. And people tend to get kind of upset when the rules that they've created are then forgotten. I'm looking at you, Man of Steel. You're a horrible film. Anyway, but Back to the Future actually stayed pretty true to the rules because they were pretty vague on them. And that was a smart thing to do. So, in Back to the Future 2, when Doc and Marty go to 1985 after having been in 2015, and they find it run by Biff Tannen, they have a confrontation with Biff and find out that they need to go back to 1955 because that's when old Biff changed things by giving the sports almanac to young Biff. And after the confrontation, they go back to 1955 immediately. And Doc says, "Don't worry, Marty. Assuming we succeed in our mission, this alternate 1985 will be changed back into the real 1985, instantaneously transforming around Jennifer and Einie." Side note, who are in the alternate 1985 at that time. Jennifer and Einie will be fine, and they will have absolutely no memory of this horrible place. End quote. So, in the rules that they just established, they're telling us that there is one road, whether or not you need the road. That was a horrible analogy on my part. So there's one road. And you can go along this road forward, and you can go back if you have a DeLorean, apparently. But there's no going side to side, because those don't exist. You just drop off like Wile E. Coyote. There's nothing there. So if you, for instance, go back, let's say to, 1955, and change some things, this road is now completely different. And I'm going to show you, it's going to be a little complicated, and I'm so sorry, it gets very convoluted. I did color code, so stick with me. Okay, so this is the original timeline that we see we see Marty going back from 1985 to 1955 in Back to the Future 1. So still in Back to the Future 1, Marty meets past version of Doc, and past version of Doc helps Marty travel back to his 1985. And we're going to say this is 1985B, the blue line. And this is actually the second 1985 that we're seeing. We're seeing his parents are now kind of more well-to-do. His brother and sister are a lot better off. His mom's not an alcoholic. Biff is basically their creepy servant. And that is going to turn from 1955 into the future. The entire timeline is blue because they have erased the original timeline and rewritten it. Now, if you want to look at another example in Rick and Morty, who don't do time travel, they do every possibility creates a different dimension, you would then see a second blue line underneath the white line because they've created a different dimension based on the decisions that they have made. But in Back to the Future, it's just the one timeline. Only that timeline exists. So I'm going to go ahead and prove my theory right now, and then I'll continue that Doc didn't have to kill Marty because the Marty we see at the very end, the second Marty we see at the very end of 1985, isn't a present Marty. He is a past Marty on a linear time scale. Or, yeah, time model, I guess is a better word for it. So in going back to Rick and Morty, we see on this linear model multiple Ricks and multiple Mortys who are at the exact same point in time. Versus in Back to the Future, we see multiple Docs and multiple Martys that are at past, present, and future points in this linear time model. We never see two current Martys and we never see two present Docs. And I'll further illustrate that. So in Back to the Future 2, if you look at the bright purple line, Doc, Marty, and Jennifer go to 2015, and then Biff, old Biff, goes from 2015 to 1955, where he gives his younger self the sports almanac, and he changes everything in 1955 all the way forward to 2015, and then which creates this kind of purple, skewed, horrible Biff ruled world, which is awful. So when Doc and Marty go back from 2015 to 1985, which is the first pink line, they find this horrible world. They absolutely hate it. It's dystopia. So then they go back from 1985, that's ruled by Biff, to 1955 again, and they set things back straight, which creates this pink 1985 right here, which is, I think, the third or fourth 1985 we've seen at this time. And in the Biff world 1985, we don't see a contemporary Marty. He's supposed to be away, and we don't see contemporary Doc. He's locked in an asylum. But the writers didn't actually technically have to do this because as soon as Doc and Marty went to this, or as soon rather as Biff went to that 1985, or changed the 1955 to the alternate Biff ruled 1985, whoever or wherever Doc and Marty were instantly changed to where they are now. And because they were at a different point in time, they were unaffected by this change, is what the rules that have been created in 1985 or in Back to the Future have illustrated. And then you're going to keep going to Back to the Future 3. Doc and Marty go from they go from 1955 to 1885, and then Marty goes from 1885 back to 1985, and then that creates this teal line here, which is the last 1985 we see in the fifth 1985. Although we don't see much of it, I can only assume it is going to be very similar to the light blue second 1985 we see at the end and of Back to the Future 1 and the very beginning of Back to the Future 2. So that's very convoluted. I am so sorry. It's a complicated thing. There aren't too many paradoxes, I don't think, in this film. I don't remember. I can't think of one. I mean, there are some little mess ups, but nothing too big. And so I have a link down below to an actual blog post I wrote because I don't know if this is easier to absorb in written form or by listening to my little narrative in audio. It's complicated because it's time travel, but it's fun because it's Back to the Future, and I want to go with more science behind it, but I mean, it's time travel, so I can't really do that, so I kind of go with rules of storytelling and the rules that were created by the creators, Bob Gale and Rob Zemeckis, and they did an amazing job in this film. and their characters. And Doc is just definitely not a killer. He didn't kill Marty. He's not Rick from Rick and Morty. I love Rick and Morty too. Please watch my video. I have a theory on the Szechuan sauce. It's pretty funny. And please leave a comment. Did I miss some things? Do you think Doc's a killer? Do you think he's on an FBI watch list? Because I do. Do you think he should have sold his technology or at least gotten it patented? Or was there a patent? Do you think he burned his house down? I totally do. Do you think the theory is right that when he put the helmet thing on Marty's head when he first traveled back to 1955 that he really was able to read Marty's mind? Because I totally love that theory. Anything? And I will probably post another video next week sometime. Thanks for watching.